Welcome back to Champion Your Life with me, Leighanne Champion, the podcast where we think through, break down, and process life together. Now, today we're going to be talking about our most important relationships and how we need to pay such close attention to them, especially these days. I think that there is so much going on for people, and if we don't pay attention, things can very quickly go off the rails. So today we're going to discuss a concept called relationship rule books. And a relationship rule book is basically an instruction guide for someone in our lives on how we would like them to behave. Have any of those? We humans often have these very strong belief systems that if other people would just behave the way that we would like them to behave, they would be so much better off, and we certainly would be better off. In my coaching practice, I run across this all the time. I'm pretty good at sensing these types of rule books. I often laugh with my clients and say, wow, now this is a very, very, very thick rule book that you've written for your husband. And have you even let him read it? Most of the people just kind of look at me and say, what? What are you talking about? But again, it's this idea that if so-and-so would just stop it and do what I tell them to do, things would be so much better. But look, when we do this to other people, it often backfires and our relationships then suffer. And then we're left wondering why all the people in our lives don't cooperate. Now, look, I understand that we all have ideas and opinions on how we think others should behave. But sometimes our thoughts around how they should behave become so embedded in our minds, we can't think about anything else. We are just constantly internalizing the rule book that we have for that person. And then it becomes quite a destructive thought loop. So I also want you to pay attention if the word should comes up in your day-to-day. For example, he should have called me. She should have made that phone call today. Or he really should stop being so late. You see, this will be your first clue that you have a rule book in place. Now, before we go any further, there is something that really needs to be stated. Some of you out there may be dealing with someone with addiction, more serious issues, abuse, and we are not talking about those kinds of situations here. I mean, that requires a whole other level of love, care, and therapy. And we're also not talking about children. Of course, we're going to have lots of rule books for them as they're growing and learning, and that's just a given, isn't it? And appropriate. And this one last disclaimer. We also don't want to confuse this situation or this concept with our work environments. We will likely have to follow many rule books out of respect and also to stay employed. So these are all very important distinctions to make. But today we are focusing on the more, how shall I say this, everyday rule books. And ironically, those rule books are about the people we love the most. And when we hang on to them, we end up completely annoying the people we love and inadvertently torturing ourselves. Here's the irony. We don't even tell most of the people in our lives that we have rule books for them. We just expect them to know or to magically figure out what it is that we need. When we keep our rule books to ourselves, we are expecting the impossible. Now, look, we can share our expectations. Nothing wrong with that. Go ahead and share what you would like to have happen, and hopefully that will be honored. But here's what we must remember. What another person does with that request is entirely up to them. It really is. I want to share an example of a rule book that I let go of. It was one of mine, and it's a story in hindsight that happened, a good solid 15 years ago, but it's still a very good example of one of the rules in my book. So, years back, my husband Tom had a very, very demanding job in New York City that had a lot of late nights. So, on the weekends, I had a rule, if you will, that we should put our boys to bed together and do bath time together, which he had zero problem with that. But then my other part of the rule was that I insisted that we spend time together afterwards. And a lot of times he was very game for that. I wanted to always watch a movie or something of that nature. But sometimes he didn't go along with my plan. I remember getting very upset, thinking that he just didn't want to be with me. I was really creating quite a story. And one day I asked him why. And he explained that he just sometimes needed that time to unwind alone. He had a very demanding job and he loved nothing more than working on old cars in the garage. So when I really think back, that was a light bulb moment for me. It had nothing to do with spending time with me. He just needed that personal time for himself. And when I think back, that rule book that I had back then caused me a lot of unnecessary tension for him and for me. It's interesting. When we let go of rules and listen to the other person's perspective, relationships can truly change for the better. When we start understanding them from a different perspective that isn't clouded just by our own thinking, expectations, and assumptions, there's beautiful things that can happen. There's some serious truth to that old saying, just try to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. There's a lot of wisdom there. And again, people don't love hearing this, but this is one of the first things that's important to remember. It's that we grown-ups have the ability and freedom to behave however we want. And P.S., that includes you. When someone has a rule book for you, think about it. It always feels like, hey, you're not the boss of me. I think we can all agree here that no one likes to be controlled. But often people will feel defensive when I first introduce this concept to them, and they'll say something to me like, so, really, Leighanne, you're telling me I shouldn't expect anything from this person, their husband, wife, partner? And they will feel in the beginning like I'm taking something away from them. Very interesting. Like they're supposed to lose control. And they're very reluctant to give up on their carefully constructed rule book. But after a while, once they recognize really that all I'm teaching here is that I'm actually trying to give them back all of their power and their emotional well-being. Once they start to see what's happening, my clients start to feel somehow relieved and then empowered. Because, let's face it, trying to control another human being takes up a lot of time and a lot of energy. Many people are at first a little puzzled that their significant others don't have to do anything differently. And yet I tell them it only takes one person to make the change in any relationship. One conscious person encourages the shift in any relationship. When they decide to take the initiative, then they start to notice that their person is suddenly responding differently. And they're often blown away at how they begin to come together. So right now, I want you to pay close attention. If you're agitated and or frustrated by this concept, I get it. Because typically this is your inner voice saying, I don't really love this, but I may need to spend some more time considering this. often we are holding on to those rule books for a reason, and it's really worth exploring the reason why. I mean, some of the strongest rules that I personally was hanging on to really came from a place of fear when I took a look at them. But this work of learning to release your rule books for another human being is all about the little expectations that you have that are weighing you down and keeping you in a state of anger and hurt and frustration. Again, I can't say this enough. It's wild how our rule books are often unspoken. We just make assumptions and expect the people in our lives to instinctively read our minds. But seriously, this is humanly impossible, isn't it? I mean, can you really think of a better recipe to set someone up for failure? But again, many of us do this all of the time. When you decide to release your rule book, you will never want to look back because you know what happens? The energy in your relationship begins to shift. It's going to begin to change. And again, it's fascinating. Really, it really is that it just takes one person to start this process, one person to let go of their rule books. I really want you to try. Just watch your relationship thrive when you decide to stop the blame game. What does it do? It changes the dance. I can't wait to share part 2 with you in 2 weeks, so keep your eye out for it. But in the meantime, in the next couple of weeks, just pay attention to some of the rule books that you have for those you love. Just try laying them down and see what happens. Why? Why, Leighanne? Because we only have this one precious life. Let's see if we can love those around us more fully. You've been listening to Champion Your Life with me, Leighanne Champion. Now, if you need some coaching around this topic, reach out. Go on my website and schedule a call. It would be my honor to help you. In the meantime, Godspeed.